Are the US and the Canada GAAPs different? Yes, US GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, and Canadian GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles in Canada, have some significant differences, despite sharing similarities due to their common foundation in generally accepted accounting principles. Followings are some key differences between US GAAP and Canadian GAAP. 1. Financial Reporting Framework. US GAAP is issued by the Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB, while Canadian GAAP is primarily based on standards issued by the Accounting Standards Board, ACSB, of the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants, CICA. In Canada, there has been a transition towards adopting International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, which has converged Canadian GAAP with IFRS to a large extent. 2. Measurement. There are differences in how certain assets and liabilities are measured. For example, Canadian GAAP traditionally allowed for the revaluation of property, plant, and equipment to fair value, whereas US GAAP generally does not permit such revaluation. 3. Revenue recognition. A US GAAP and Canadian GAAP have historically had some differences in revenue recognition criteria, although efforts have been made to converge towards a more unified approach, especially with the adoption of IFRS in Canada. 4. Inventory valuation. Canadian GAAP historically allowed last in, first out, LIFO, inventory valuation, which is prohibited under US GAAP. 5. Governmental accounting. There are differences in the accounting standards applied to governmental entities between the US and Canada. 6. Sector-specific guidance. Both frameworks may have sector-specific guidance that differs based on industry practices and regulatory requirements in each country. 7. Sector-specific guidance. Disclosure requirements. There may be differences in the specific disclosures required in financial statements under each framework. Conclusion. It's important to note that Canadian accounting standards have been undergoing significant convergence with IFRS in recent years, with the intention of harmonizing more closely with global standards. This convergence has reduced some of the historical differences between US GAAP and Canadian GAAP. Thank you.